Well, I wanted to talk some more about Jacob and the Jacobites, and kind of wanted to skip forward a little bit. We still have a lot to cover on what happened in Egypt, but it seems like a lot of people want to claim to be the Jacobites, to be descended from the sons of Jacob. And some of them are correct and some of them are not correct, but it's important to understand that. Let's talk a little bit about the sons, okay? They all have the same father, obviously, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Most of the kids, all but 1, 2, 3, 4, descend from Laban. So Jacob married 2 of Laban's daughters, Leah, who had most of the kids, and then Rachel. Those 2 women are sisters. Rachel having Joseph and Benjamin. And a lot of times you see it's called the 13 tribes. Well, there really are 13 tribes. And why is there 13 tribes if there's only 12 sons? That doesn't make sense, does it? Well, it makes sense because Joseph had 2 boys. He married an Egyptian woman after he was sold into slavery, and he rose to power under Pharaoh Ramses. And he was given a wife, Potiphar, and he had 2 boys, Ephraim, symbol the bull, and Manasseh. Manasseh's symbols are the quiver of arrows and the olive branch. If you want to see what those symbols look like, look at the presidential seal of the United States and you will see the symbols of Manasseh. Anyway, so instead of Joseph having a tribe, and a lot of times you do see it as the tribe of Joseph, you'll see like a sheath of wheat. That a lot of times is Joseph, but really it's his 2 boys each got a tribe. So are these sons going to look a lot alike? Quite a bit. There was 2 maidservants. I'm not sure, but I believe they were of the same blood origin, same country origin. Bilhah and Zilpah. Those were the maidservants. So who are their children? That's Dan and Naphtali, and then Gad and Asher. So you have those 4 boys. And they were treated as just as the other sons, even though they were sons of the maidservants. So you might have a little different look from those sons. And the symbols for those, like Dan has some interesting symbols. All of these symbols are from Jacob's blessing. I'll have to look up where it is. I think it's Genesis chapter 49 on his deathbed. But what the blessing for Dan was something about you will be an adder in the path, and you'll make the horse riseth up. And the symbols for Dan are usually the snake, the eagle, and the uprising horse. Then you have Naphtali, however you want to say it. His symbol is always the deer. Okay, now let's switch over to Gad and Asher. Asher, his symbol is pretty unique. It's a tree. And there's another symbol for Asher too. I got to look that up. It's some type of cup. And then we have Gad. Gad is a troop. His name means a troop. And you will either see a tent or multiple military tents, really basic tents, or you will see a rider like a soldier on a horse. So it's easy to get his symbol and Dan mixed up. But anyway, I got to thinking about the modern day church and what they think of these tribes. And they don't care much about these tribes. They seem to not study them much. The Abrahamic blessing, the blessings that go to these tribesmen, I don't think they care much about. In fact, I think a lot of people in the church believe that after Jesus came, these tribes don't really matter. But it's interesting that in Jesus' time, they seemed to know, each person seemed to know what tribe he was from. You know, Paul was Benjamite. Of course, we know Christ is tribe of Judah, as is David and Solomon and Mary. And there's a few others mentioned in the New Testament too, but it seemed to be somewhat common knowledge to know what tribe you're from. Now, if you are a Northern European, your ancestors are of Northern European descent, or just to name countries, Iceland, Scotland, Ireland, Hungary, Poland, Muscovite, German, Italian, I mean, so many of those countries, Lithuanian, Ukrainian. If you Spain, there's another one. If you look at your coat of arms, and here's where there's a lot of lies too, because I don't want to get into the orphan trains, but if you look at the orphan trains and the redesignation of names, there's a lot of lies about what if your name is a real legitimate name from your family, or was basically pulled out of a hat and give it to your great-grandfather, and he just shut his mouth and rolled with it. But anyway, there's some truth. I mean, you look at even the crown, the coat of arms, and the family crests, and even of cities in Europe, a lot of those symbols line up directly with the 12 tribes of Jacob. And it's hard to find other countries in other parts of the world that have this. And how important is this to most modern Caucasians? And we can go back to the word Caucasian and look at why they're called Caucasians. It has to do with the Caucasus Mountains. You look up around Georgia there, and there's a pass there. It's called Israel's Pass, and there's probably something to that. So now what's interesting is there's another theory out there that's worth looking into, and that is the it's gonna escape me. Israelite, let me pause, it'll come to me in a second. The Hebrew Israelites. The Hebrew Israelite theory is pretty interesting. There is a chart of countries, including Cuba, Mexico, Puerto Rico, different places in Africa, and they say, you know, all these guys are, you know, if you're from Cuba, you're from I don't know, Manasseh or something like that. Pretty interesting and worth noting. I don't throw the whole list away like some people do. I think there's actually some hidden jewels in that list, but I don't agree with the whole list. Specifically, the countries that are really interesting are Mexico and Cuba are very interesting countries to look at as descendants of Jacob. But we'll get into that later. You know, for a lot of French people, the theories, a lot of this is common knowledge too. That's the funny thing. You go back just 80, 100 years, a lot of the things I'm saying on this video that are so radical were in people's encyclopedias in their house. You know, I mean, I have the migration, and basically the theory is that after the captivity and the northern 10 tribes, they dispersed, and they dispersed a specific way. In fact, I have a map of all the ancient and antiquity. Boy, it's late at night. My brain's not working. All the old Jewish sites, and what I mean when I say Jewish is Israelite sites. And what you find is they did very little migration on the south side of the Mediterranean. Where did they go? the north side. And so as you look at that migration, and these were the descendants of Abraham that had a blessing that apparently had no expiration date. And you look at the wealth of those nations, the European nations, compared to the rest of the world, it's insane. I mean, they have all the wealth. It's hard to argue with. So if you're going to go with some of these other theories, and am I saying that if you're rich, you're a man of God? No, I'm not saying that at all. But these blessings were earthly blessings, a lot of these blessings. So we can get into that later. But what's interesting to me is so many of these people whose great-grandfathers were farmers in Minnesota and Ohio and Chicago, and you look at how they came through and they came to the U.S. and what countries they came from. I can't tell you how many of these people I talked to said, yeah, well, my great-great-grandfather, he was a Jewish guy, or he did this Jewish practice. And you just hear it over and over and over and over. Switzerland, Germany. So, anyway, not only are people not interested in that, but there's this belief that, well, you ask them, well, who are the Jews? There are these people. There are these people that live in Israel today. And all that was fulfilled, not too long ago in Israel. That's actually what these people believe. So, and I went to a church that was a messianic type Jewish church. I don't know if I'm getting the name right. It was a Christian church, but it was cool because they actually observed the 10 Commandments. But what I thought was a little odd is I thought they really got tripped up between political Israel and biblical Israel. In other words, whoever was in power right now in Israel, they believe that must be all the tribes right there. Oh my word, it could not be further from the truth. And when did this battle for the blessing seat of the son of Jacob, or even the sons of Isaac occur? It occurred Jacob and Esau. I mean, you look at how Jacob took the blessing and made kind of a dirty deal with his brother. I mean, those two, the offspring of the Edomites, which is Esau's children, and the Jacobites, it's going to go on forever. But I guess what I'm saying is I believe the propaganda was so effective that the current actual descendants of Jacob, who hold all these blessings in their hand and have right to all these blessings, they themselves believe it's foolish. They know not who they are, and they just claim to be straight Gentiles. They don't even want to be among the Israelites. They don't even want to be, and if they do, they only want it through adoption. It's almost like you're the direct blood descendant of a king, and you deny it, and you say, I just want to really be adopted. It's kind of strange. It's kind of strange. That kind of brings me to another topic, and I think so much of the trouble is we, as a culture, believe so much of whatever is presented on the false reality of television. Kind of like an actor-based reality, false reality. And we're not even aware of why people would want to deceive us. It's kind of like whenever you tell somebody, hey, this situation isn't really like that, and the news is telling you like, well, why would they lie? As soon as I hear that somebody say that, I just shake my head. Well, why would they lie? I mean, it's almost painful to think of where you could start holding that person's hand and taking them through almost like things you've learned half your life you've learned. It's like, where have you been? Where have you been that you'd ask a question, why would the TV lie to you? That's all the TV does. It's kind of like I was watching, oh yeah, let me get to my point. So they're doing all these DNA tests, Ancestry.com and 23andMe. And it just so happens that the founder or the president of 23andMe is married to one of the Google founders. I don't know if it's Sergey or the other one. It's like, do you not think that's a little strange when you're talking about power rolled up? And what's funny is they're very active on getting these tests. They want to test everybody. But what they give you in return is so absolutely bogus and vague that it doesn't really explain why they would want that info so bad. They do. They want that info so bad from you. And yeah, your life can get real nasty sometimes when you get one of those tests. I'm not going to get into that element right here, but let's just say you may or may not have a target on your back. And by getting those tests, you are certainly opening up some spiritual doors. But why would they lie? So, you see, God, even though you may have taken your family crest that may have tied you directly to Reuben, Simon, Judah, did I say Simon? Simeon. One of these guys, Benjamin, Ephraim, Manasseh, Zebulon, and you took them and you inherited them from your grandpa. And how much did you sell them for? Well, you didn't sell them for anything. You just donated them to the Goodwill. Are you serious? Because you just thought it was just this old thing that didn't matter. Well, there's a certain wisdom in having all those tribes depicted as symbols. As a lion or a wolf or a donkey or a deer or a tent or a boat, Zebulon. Because the language has changed, but those symbols don't, okay? Those symbols, you can look at a symbol of a boat in any culture and you know what you're looking at. And that's pretty awesome. Whereas languages, they can change. Big time. They will change. Cities will change. The names of cities will change. I mean, in Austin, the streets will change before your very own eyes. They will change the street. If you're driving down the street, it'll change to 4 different names. But, oh yeah, so you have this scripture when Jesus is approached by the Syrophoenician woman, and she wants him to heal her child. I think it was her son. I should know, but I think it was her son. And Jesus didn't want to talk to her. And disciples are like bothered by this, or bothered by her. Hey, Jesus, aren't you going to talk to this woman? She won't leave us alone. And he says some strange things to her. He does finally talk to her. He says, I come only but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Is it right for me to take the bread from the children's table and feed it to the dogs? That was strange. And she took it in stride and responded amazingly, and she said yes. She said, but even the dogs receive the crumbs from the master's table. And Jesus ultimately said, because of your faith, your child is healed. And just from his speech, he that's all he had to do. But you step back and you go to that verse where he said, I come only but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, you gotta, if you're a thinking person, you're gonna think, well, who's the house of Israel? And who are the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Well, the house of Israel is pretty easy. I mean, not long after Solomon's rule of Israel, you know, with David, we had these great years, and Solomon, we built the temple. But Solomon's son, yeah, it kind of went bad. And that's when the nation of Israel split into Israel and Judah. The two houses. Now, it didn't split like 6 and 6 sons. Like, that would be interesting if it did. Oddly, it split 10 sons in Israel. I believe that's the northern house. And 2 sons in the Judah. So who are the 2 sons in Judah? Benjamin and Judah, of course. You know, if you're speaking properly about a Jew, that's actually a descendant of Judah. We use it to describe Israelites. But, so the northern 10 tribes is who Jesus is speaking of here. And we see another odd verse where Jesus is dealing, and by the way, the Syrophoenician woman, just to step back in that, she is quite likely a woman from Lebanon. A Lebanese woman, let me rephrase, a Canaanite woman. How people are going to get mad at me from Lebanon? And where is Israel? You know, where is the promised land now? It's basically made up of Lebanon, Jordan, Israel. I'm missing a country. You know, I shouldn't make this video this late. We'll come back to that later. Israel, Jordan, Assyria, and Lebanon. That's where the promised land is today, and that's where so much action happens on the news. But yeah, the northern 10 tribes would be Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali. If I just said Judah, remove that. Zebulun, Joseph. I'm missing a couple there. We'll come back to that later. Levi. The Levites were the priestly tribe. That's like Moses and Aaron. And they weren't allowed to own property. Oh yeah, another verse that's interesting is when Jesus is dealing with these, I think they were Pharisees, guys trying to entrap him. He basically told them, hey, where I'm going, you can't go. And these guys said, where is this man going that we cannot follow? Could he be, or is he going to the dispersia among the Greeks? And we kind of read that over in church, don't even think, well, what's that about? Okay, on to the next verse. Whoa, that's pretty powerful. Is he going to the dispersia among the Greeks? Well, apparently it was, because everywhere he went, there was a Jewish temple. So he's trying, it's kind of like you look at the story of the prodigal son, and you see there's 2 sons in one house. They live in their father's house. One son goes out and makes a fool of himself. That's Israel. It's the northern 10 tribes. The other son stays in the house. Somehow he stays there. He stays in the land. And that is Benjamin and Judah, the house of Judah. Not to be confused with the tribe of Judah. So there's a good argument that the whole prodigal son is that other son. And you know that father welcomes that son home and meets him at the end of the road. I'll have to review that parable. But there's a very good argument that that prodigal son is the house of Israel. Are you not taught that in your churches? I wasn't taught that in any of my churches. So, there's another another point I was going to make. It's really cool. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here in a minute, but I just wanted to mention it's really interesting how the church teaches that the 10 Commandments aren't really necessary to be followed anymore. And specifically the commandment you really don't have to worry about is the commandment that is most written about through the whole Old Testament that infuriated God. Every time the Israelites were turned over, let loose, ignored, punished, it was almost always because of their refusal to observe the Sabbath. That thing really angered God. And it seems like the one you'd have the easiest time doing, because you keep the day holy. You don't work on that day. It restores your soul. You connect with God. That seems like a day everyone would want to follow, but that was always a problem. And it's funny how often I talk to people in the church today, oh, that's Sunday. Not really. I mean, in I think over 300 languages, the word for Saturday is Sabbath, Shabbat, Sabbato. Not in our language, but that is a very trampled upon commandment. That specific one. There's another one too. I'm going to get into that one later, but I'm going to cut this off now, and we'll try to. I'm starting to ramble. I do want to continue this. This is a really fun discussion on, what is the church position today? Who are they? And where are we in the Bible? What is going on right now? Thank you.